The city of GWERU, lying about 275 kilometers due southwest of the country's capital, Harare. In this city lies one of the country's 5 regional museums. But this specific museum is home to a fascinating collection of military and liberation history exhibitions. This museum also shelters a rich collection of different brands of armored tanks as well as combat vehicles, mainly used by the Allied forces as well as the Germans during the World War II, and later on adapted for use by the Rhodesian military and police forces before the attainment of the country's independence. Ever since the advent of warfare, a number of weapons to fight wars were witnessed, invented and developed across the globe. The 9th century, which marked a defining period in the advent of weapons of war, witnessed different firing methods like matchlock, flintlock, as well as the development of cartridges. With the introduction of other technologies, repeating and automatic rifles came into being, including revolvers among other machine guns. Remarkably, part of the military museum exhibition also highlights on the proceedings and events which culminated in the birth of the police force in present-day Zimbabwe. However, and going back in time, in this land which had no country status in 1890, dating backwards, kingdoms and chiefdoms were the order of the day. The Ndebele and Kalanga occupied the southwestern parts of present-day Zimbabwe, while the dominant Shona groups enjoyed an expansive spread of their ancient capitals in the central and northern parts of the land. These indigenous communities successfully thrived independently only until the arrival of the pioneer column on the Zimbabwe Plateau in 1890. The year marked the beginning of a long, gruesome journey of struggle for independence, which was only attained some generations later on the 18th of April in 1980. In the Liberation History Gallery here, a detailed chronology of the country's rich liberation history dating back to the year 1890 is well articulated. But the puzzle of the country's colonial history is never complete without correctly connecting together the story pieces of colonial masterminds like Cecil John Rhodes and Leander Starr Jameson. These two have their part of the country's colonial history comprehensively told through displays in this gallery. The struggle for this country's independence can always be attributed to early heroes and heroines, as much as it can be traced back to as early as the 1890s, an era which witnessed vicious combat battles in the Chimrenga-Umvukela Wars. Early heroes and heroines of the Chimrenga-Umvukela Wars are befittingly honored in this museum, with artistic displays of figures like King Lobengula of the Ndebele Kingdom, Mbuyanyanda and Sekuru Kaguvi. Liberation War heroes and the Revolutionary Party ZANU-PF second Chimrenga leaders like Comrade Herbert Chitepo, Comrade Leopold Takawira and Comrade Josiah Tongogara have their heroic stories objectively presented in this gallery. But to complement these displays, the National Museums and Monuments of Zimbabwe, who are the country's heritage and cultural custodians, with partnership efforts and assistance from the Air Force of Zimbabwe and other institutions, established an aviation section of the museum which traces down the history of aviation and war aircrafts in the country. Welcome to the Aviation Museum, quietly located a few hundred meters from where the Military Museum is today, and in this episode of Heritage in Focus, we explore the spectacular aircraft displays in this museum, as well as unearth the most fascinating and hidden facts about the country's rich aviation history. This is a Vickers Viscount passenger aircraft, registration number Z/YNA. It was handed over to the National Museums and Monuments of Zimbabwe by Mr. V.V. Disau on behalf of the Ministry of Transport on the 6th of August 1986. Interestingly, the place for the handover process was this city GWERU, but at Thornhill Air Base. This passenger aircraft was the first Viscount to be operated by the now defunct Central African Airways, a forerunner of the country's airliner Air Zimbabwe. On the 25th of April 1956, the Viscount was flown to Zimbabwe, then called Southern Rhodesia. Still in 1956, the aircraft was placed on the London-Harare-Johannesburg route. It operated on this route until 1965. But due to dynamics at the operation company, this passenger plane was later placed at the Harare-Mozambique-South Africa route. In 1966, another twist in the aircraft's operations occurred. The aircraft was given to Malawi as a share of that country after the dissolution of the Central African Airways. But such a situation did not last long. The passenger aircraft was bought back by Air Rhodesia around 1973. Upon its return, the passenger plane was placed onto the tourist circuit route of Kariba-Wange, Victoria Falls, Bulawayo, as well as the South African route again. But the aircraft lifespan could not last any longer. It had to embark on its last flight on this route on the 31st of May 1985, and some 4 months later, exactly on the 27th of September 1985, Vickers Viscount ZYNA was completely withdrawn from service. But in its design, the Viscount accommodated 57 passengers with a cruising capacity speed of 300 miles per hour at a range of 1,800 feet above sea level. By the time of its retirement, the plane had completed an astonishing 40,738 flying hours against some 31,410 landings. Translating this to non-stop continuous flying without landings, the Vickers Viscount literally flew continuously for about 40,738 hours. Converting the hours to years, the aircraft was in the air during its operation period for more than 4.5 years.
This plane here is a passenger plane. It's known as the Vickers Viscount Type 748. It was acquired from Britain in 1956. That was in April. And it started operations. That was in 1956, the 1st of June. This plane was placed on a London Harare-Johannesburg route. It remained on that route from 1966 up to 1965. Then from 1965 June, it was placed on the Harare, Mozambique and Johannesburg route. In 1966, this plane was handed over to the government of Malawi as part of that country's share after the break-up of the Central African Airways. This was due to the UDI, that is Unilateral Declaration of Independence. In fact, before the breakup of UDI, all the properties of these three countries were based here in Rhodesia or Southern Rhodesia. So after the breakup, this plane plus many other, especially railway assets, were handed over to the Malawi government. Then from in 1966, it was brought back, or it was bought back by the Rhodesia Air Force. And when it was brought back, it was placed on the Mozambique Johannesburg route, and the locally, that is Wange, Victoria Falls and other resort towns. This plane used to carry, that is 57 passengers. As you can see, if you can count the number of seats which are in here, there are 57 in all. And it was flown by the pilot plus co-pilot. Then soon after the pilots, there was the navigator. The navigator was mainly there for direction purposes. And soon after the pilots, there was the toilet, that is gents and ladies just behind you. It's gents and ladies there. And there is that room which is on the back. That is where the air hostesses were situated. So there were 2 air hostesses. So this plane had 4 engines. 2 on one side and the 2 on the other. And the fuel which is used by aeroplanes, I can say, it's known as kerosene, jet A1 or power paraffin. And this plane was usually used by especially business people whereby you can see there are no big luggage carriers. So the small compartments which are here, they were just for lightweight luggage. That is briefcases for the business community.
The period around 1939 plunged the entire world into a global war. This period, which witnessed the outbreak of the World War II, literally saw the absorption of the entire training element of the old Southern Rhodesia Air Force into the Royal Air Force. By virtue of that, the training element became the nucleus of the then inclusive Royal Training Group. But demobilization processes which followed the end of the war triggered the trickling of scores of the war's combatants back to Rhodesia from the British services. From the returning element, the nucleus of a force to be established was created, and the now better structured and soundly coordinated force was to rise again. The 28th of November 1947 will forever be a day to remember for Zimbabwe as a nation. On this day, the Air Force was established as a permanent unit, a development which marked the beginning of the Rhodesian Air Force. During that period, the unit operated with basic tools and equipment which included 6 rebuilt Tiger Moors. With a revitalized determination to stamp a mark, it acquired 6 more Harvard trainers that were purchased from the Rhodesian Air Training Group, as well as 12 more Harvards which were purchased from South Africa. By 1954, the unit had already been realizing tangible expansion through another acquisition of Vampire Fighter bombers and Provost trainers. But on the 11th of November 1965, the Anglo-Rhodesian political confrontation exploded. Rhodesia, then under Ian Douglas Smith, had declared itself an independent and sovereign state. In retaliation to such a political development, the British government launched an economic war against the newly declared infant state of Southern Rhodesia. The British government's move was an enormous blow to Ian Smith's regime, whose aviation industry entirely depended on the British. But somehow and through various methods of improvisation, the newly established Air Force unit of Southern Rhodesia managed to thrive. It defied the odds by successfully reducing costs of starting its jet engines, as well as acquiring yet another squadron of Trojan aircraft. Interestingly today, a sizable number of these combat aircraft are on display in this aviation museum.
The National Aviation Museum is a product of National Museums and Monuments of Zimbabwe, and it reflects part of our Liberation War heritage, because the aircraft that are housed in here are part of our Liberation War heritage. The purpose of having the Aviation Museum was to complement other collections, military collections, that we have at the Zimbabwe Military Museum, because at the Zimbabwe Military Museum, our main research focus looks into the military history of this country from occupation up to independence, even up to contemporary issues. So this aviation museum houses different military aircraft that were used by the Rhodesia Air Training Group from 1940, also moving to the formation of the Southern Rhodesian Air Force in 1947. Some of the objects or artifacts that we have here were used during that period up to independence.
The Honda FVA-9 number 1188. It was manufactured in England by Hawker Siddeley Aviation Limited. The aircraft's power plant was a Rolls-Royce Avon 207. The aircraft's first flight was in England, but it was later sold to the Kenyan Air Force. Though delivered to this country around late 1962 and early 1963, the Honda FVA-9 only took its first flight in this country on the 23rd of April in 1979. On the 22nd, 1982, the Honda took its last flight, and barely a month later, on the 25th of July the same year, this aircraft was damaged to its present state during an alleged sabotage attack in the early hours of that day by believed enemy agents at Thornhills Air Base.
This craft is a hunting Percival Provost. The Provost were actually acquired or delivered to this country in 1954. These belonged to number 2 squadron of the Royal Rhodesian Air Force, which superintended the Air Force from 1953 up to 1963. The Percival Provost was actually used for training flying instructors before training of basic and advanced flying to pupil pilots. They were also used in Wangi and Kariba to guard key installations against hostile attacks from the liberation fighters. And they were also used to quell urban disturbances in times of riotous situations in towns.
Designed in 1945 is this English Canberra R2504 fighter. This fighter aircraft was only purchased as part of 15 jet bombers from Britain by the Rhodesian government in 1959. With a capacity to carry a bomb load weighing about 6,000 pounds, the Canberra had a radar bomb sight to counter enemy attacks from behind in all weather conditions. Due to its monstrous engine power and performance capacity, the Rhodesian Air Force Squadrons 5 and 6 mainly used this warplane as their preferred choice in most of their combat operations. During its flight operations, the Canberra bomber was fast enough to escape interception whilst carrying such an enormous bomb load. During Operation Hurricane around 1973, the Canberras were mostly involved in carrying out daily armed fights over the operational area, as well as participating in cross-border incursions in neighboring Mozambique and Zambia. But after an illustrious period of operations spanning to about 26 years, the Canberra was finally pensioned from the Air Force of Zimbabwe in 1985. This is a de Havilland Vampire FB9 fighter jet. This combat aircraft was mainly used for armed reconnaissance and ground attacks. The period of the aircraft active operations spanned from the late 1960s to the mid-1970s, a peak period of the colonial regime's anti-guerrilla operations in this country. Like most other jet fighters operating in this country then, this jet fighter was only obtained from Britain as part of a consignment of 16 at a period between 1953 and 1954. Due to its capacity and performance in war operations, this de Havilland FB9 fighter aircraft inevitably formed the nucleus of the Rhodesian Air Force No. 1 Squadron through its integral maintenance of security role in the then British Commonwealth Empire. Remarkably, this aircraft had been introduced and performed exceptionally in the last part of the World War II. Chronologically, such a period of entry into full-time combat operation makes the Vampire FB9 fighter jet a senior citizen in the country's aviation industry. Brought to Rhodesia in 1954 is the de Havilland Vampire T2 trainer aircraft. The Royal Rhodesian Air Force Squadron No. 2 mainly used this aircraft with the squadron unit, firstly training its instructors before carrying out basic and advanced training to student pilots.
When the Rhodesia Air Training Group was formed in 1940, the de Havilland Tiger Moth were used, or they formed the backbone of the Rhodesia Air Training Group. Again, in 1947, when the Southern Rhodesian Air Force was formed, the same crafts, the de Havilland Tiger Moth, they were used, and they again formed the backbone of the Southern Rhodesian Air Force. Just like the Tiger Moth, the Harvards were also used by the Rhodesia Air Training Group, which was under Sir Air Vice Marshal Charles Meredith. These crafts were used for basic training, and again, when the Southern Rhodesian Air Force was formed in 1947, they had to buy 6 Harvards from the Rhodesia Air Training Group. After that, later, 12 more Harvards were purchased from the government of South Africa. And this Harvard was purchased from South Africa in 1949. These aircraft have got rondelles that show the period during which they were used, like the blue, white and red rondelle. That one was used between 1947 and 1953. Thereafter, from 1953 up to 1963, it was now the Federation period. So instead of having the rondelle as it is, they had to add 3 spears at the center, with each spear representing a member of the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland, comprising Zambia, which was Northern Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, Southern Rhodesia, Malawi, Nyasaland.
But there is one unique aircraft also on display in this museum, the more and only Supermarine Spitfire Mk-22, Britain's premier fighter aircraft.
The Supermarine Spitfire was designed by Reginald Michel in 1939. This craft proved to be a useful aircraft, a very powerful aircraft during the Second World War. It was being used by the Allied forces. The Germans had their own version, which was the Messerschmitt Bf-109, but it had no chance against the Supermarine Spitfire. The Spitfires that we have here were acquired from Britain in 1951, and they became the first combat aircraft to be acquired for that purpose by the Southern Rhodesian Air Force. They were in service from 1951 up to 1954, when they developed a lot of technical problems. Although some of the problems were attended to, most of these aircraft were laid off. They were actually replaced by the de Havilland Vampires that were brought into this country between 1953 and 1954.
Even though this aviation display was set up to exhibit the combat fighter planes which hounded the innocent citizens of this country during the struggle for independence, it will forever remain a product of Zimbabwe's historical reality. Comprehensive understanding of the exhibition serves to inspire post-independent Zimbabwean generations to appreciate the country's rich liberation history, as well as emulate the selflessness of their forefathers and mothers who for decades endured relentless and offensive attacks from the air by the colonial regime through use of most of these combat aircraft.
This has been a very fruitful day coming to GWERU Museum. Our children have benefited a lot. It's like when we teach some of these things and they come here and see, manipulate, if they join all those, they really comprehend what exactly we're talking about. So we really appreciate such educational tours where children come here and learn. They have been to the other first part where they managed to see all the various kinds of warplanes. I think this has been a very fruitful day.
This aviation exhibition, which is also at the heart of the country's liberation heritage and history of the airborne wing of the Zimbabwe Defense Forces, will eternally remain a testimony to the fact that true national history is a living and crude force that always taught humankind to do and surmount more for the betterment of the future.
His eyes were black, his face dismay.